Welcome to the Prevail Over Cancer Podcast, where we take a metabolic approach to help guide you on preventing, prevailing, and striving over cancer.
We are live on the Prevail Over Cancer Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jeff Lopes. I got an incredible co-host, Keith Bishop. How are you, Keith?
Wonderful. And you?
Incredible. And we have such an incredible honor today to have this incredible guest on. And when I was diagnosed with cancer, he was one of the first individuals that I kind of started following and trying to understand and read his books. And then when I met Keith actually told me that he was inspired to do what he does by our guest. So I'm honored to have on today Dr. Patrick Quillin. How are you, sir?
I'm doing outstanding. Thank you for sharing your viewers with me.
This is going to be an incredible podcast, and we have lots of questions for you. So, and I'm sure Keith is going to nerd out and have a ton of questions for you as well. So let's just start off by giving a little Cole's note on your history. I mean, you've been in this industry now helping in the oncology nutritional industry for 47 years. You have over 20 books you've written and #1 sellers. How'd you get into this? I want to hear kind of a little backstory of how you got into this whole world.
As a child, I always wanted to know what makes it tick. When I was a young boy, my parents bought me a watch. I took it apart, wanted to see what made it tick. I did that same thing the next 3 years in a row, and they stopped buying me watches. I remember as a kid just cutting up an earthworm on a rainy day in Princeton, Illinois, saying, "What's inside of this?" And it wasn't out of cruelty. And eventually I went to Notre Dame and studied pre-med for 2 years. And then I said, this doesn't make any sense. Drugs and surgery don't cure anything. So I transferred to San Diego State, finished my bachelor's in nutrition, then on to my master's and doctorate in nutrition. So nutrition makes sense to me, and it's not the only epigenetic or lifestyle factor. So I get out of school and I'm teaching college, working in clinics, but the most disenfranchised patients on the planet Earth are cancer patients. So right now, the dogma of oncology is that we're going to cut, burn, and poison the cancer out of your body and ignore why you got it, which is etiology, underlying cause. So I was brought into Cancer Treatment Centers of America. I was their VP of nutrition. We had 4 hospitals. So I worked shoulder to shoulder with oncologists, and clearly, we made a difference. We had many patients most of the patients, 2/3 of the patients came to us refractory, end stage, get your affairs in order, and we're able to turn many of them around and put them into remission of 5 years cancer-free, which is the American Cancer Society definition of remission. So it makes a difference. When I say beating cancer with nutrition, I'm talking about improving quality and quantity of life and chances for a complete remission while you're working with your doctor. And we can go into the depths of this, but cancer is a metabolic disease. It is not some foreign object that's inside of you that you can cut, burn, and poison out and ignore the patient. So I hope we get into the deep, dark depths of oncology right now, because I believe we're on the cusp of a renaissance. Renaissance, of course, is French for renewal, a new category. So I think there's enough people like the two of you who are brilliant and spreading the message to the people that you need to do something more than just your doctors. You know, oftentimes it's well-intentioned, but change the way your body works. And my vectors, the epigenetics. So genetics says you look and smell and sound something like your ancestors. But epigenetics is above that. And that's where we think of attitude, nutrition, toxins, energy alignment, microbiome, and exercise. And those are the 6 vectors that create who you are, your metabolism. And something's gone wrong in those if you have cancer. And so changing that underlying cause is crucial to have a beneficial outcome with a cancer patient. I've always been interested. I'm 47 years into it. I'm learning every day. Every day I become more humble at the extraordinary mechanism of the human body. It is incredible. 37 trillion cells, each one of them generating 100,000 biochemical reactions per second. That's not counting the 100 trillion microbes in your gut. and each of them creating all of these postbiotics. There's a crosstalk between these microbes in your gut. There is quorum sensing. So this is you think about a V12 bi-turbo BMW is an impressive car. That ain't nothing next to a human being. What we are is amazing. And as I said, Renaissance, modern medicine has taken this approach of the rheumatologist doesn't talk to the diabetologist, who doesn't talk to the nephrologist and the psychiatrist, and on it goes. The body is this ornate mechanism that all works in unison.
Yeah.
And when we look at the body as a metabolic organism with a spirit, because as a nutritionist, I'm quick to point out that what you are eating may not be as important as what's eating you. So before our interview is done, we will talk about attitude and the stress that can cause cancer.
So what about, you mentioned the metabolism. So we have I guess the whole body metabolism, but then the metabolism of a cancer cell, and so what is that relationship and difference?
Well, cancer, we go back to Otto Warburg, who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in the 1930s for identifying that cancer is a fermenting organism. Somehow, some way, organisms within your body become defective, or they literally rebel. They secede from the union, and they become fermentative. And so instead of burning carbohydrate, fat, and protein, they burn primarily sugar, carbohydrate. They become an obligate glucose metabolizer, and they are remarkably similar to a fungus. And there's actually a book written by an Italian oncologist says cancer is a fungus. And if you look at some of the unique aspects of cancer and fungus. And I remember sitting in a tumor board meeting with cancer treatment centers, and that tumor board meeting means you've got the internal medicine specialist. He's monitoring the patient's non-medical needs. You've got the radiologist who is looking at these CT scans, PET scans. You got the radiation therapist who's using radiation to slow down cancer. You got the oncologist using chemotherapy, and on it goes. The whole team's there. And they would mention, isn't it strange that this cancer, it is an obligate glucose metabolizer. We know that. That's why we use a PET scan to find it. They inject radioactively labeled sugar into the veins of the patient, and then they use a Geiger counter device to track where did the cancer go, because it's a sugar feeder, and that now we know where it's at. And then unfortunately, after this procedure, the doctors will say, eat whatever you want. Well, that doesn't make any sense at all. We move on. So they said it's a sugar feeder. Yes. It also generates lactic acid as a byproduct, which then changes the pH in the tissue. It also creates enzymes that can literally dissolve their way or metabolize their way through tissue. That's how they metastasize. And you know what? Fungus does all of that too. So there's some remarkable similarities. I remember one of the people who was influential in my career was a Doc Pennington. He developed colon cancer, stage 4, metastatic to the liver. Get your affairs in order. No medicine's going to help you. He took antifungal medication. Within 3 months was in complete remission and sat on the same bar stool for the next 20 years and died at the age of 92. Now, I'm not telling people to sit on a bar stool or that antifungal medication is the only answer. What I'm sharing with you is we have to go back to Louis Pasteur. Actually, let's go back to Ignaz Semmelweis. Semmelweis in 1860 in Austria noticed that we had puerperal fever or maternal fever. What they would do is the doctors in those days would do an autopsy, then they'd move into the stable and deliver a foal, a young horse, wipe their hands off with a towel, and then they would go in and deliver a baby. Well, 90% of these women and infants developed infections, and 20% of them died. And Dr. Semmelweis says, I wonder if we wash our hands, if that would help. So you wash your hands in a dilute solution of chlorine. He can cut puerperal fever to 0. And they said, well, what's causing this? He says, I don't know. They laughed him out of the medical profession. Now there's Semmelweis universities all over the world. Nevertheless, 30 years later, Louis Pasteur came forth with his laboratory and he said, I have found Dr. Semmelweis's spooks, and there were bacteria, so they could explain it. So what's been happening in medicine is we have a tendency we have to know why or we can't use it. We know how. For instance, birch bark, been used for centuries. Native Americans would boil up the bark and they would give it to people who had a fever or a cold, and it helped. And nobody could explain why. And it wasn't until 1970s they said acetyl salicylic acid, which comes out of that birch bark, and it's actually involved in prostaglandin metabolism. Now we can explain how. Now we got a patent. Now we got Bayer making it by the billions. The point is, we know that a well-nourished cancer patient can better manage the disease. And we can explain most of the mechanisms of why. And to this day, we still have 10,000 oncologists who ignore it all.
I wanted to dive into
what?
Let me dive into something.
Okay.
And I love that you're saying that, because your last little segment there with oncology, pretty much pushing it aside. And that was my first experience. When I sat in front of an oncologist, I did my research. I've been an entrepreneur for 30 years, so I really break everything down almost like a business. And I kind of looked at my body, and the first thing after I got diagnosed, within the first couple of days, is I said, okay, let's figure out the root cause. Let's try to diagnose the last 10 to 15 years of my life and what stages, from stress to environmental to diet, what things that I did. And I just started writing down everything. And that was my first reaction to, okay, now let's start correcting these things. Let's start eliminating these things from myself. And when I sat in front of oncology, and I already knew what he was going to recommend when it came to treatments and whatnot. And I said, okay, what is your understanding, and what is your knowledge, and what is your recommendations when it comes to diet, exercise, to supplements? And in the gentleman, which he's still my oncologist, incredible doc, but his reaction was, there's no science behind that stuff. That's exactly what he said. And he says there's science behind our treatments. And right there, that was, in my mind, that was an automatic reaction was, okay, I'm not doing your treatment, when he said that to me. And why are we not we're seeing a shift, but we're not seeing the shift that we need into where you, Keith, other individuals are pushing. Why is it taking so long? Is it all because big pharma? Is it all because of the money? Like, why are people not shifting to where, let's find the root cause. Let's find the metabolic reason for your cancer. Because once we could find it and people could really focus on it, I think that's going to eliminate, even just in the family tree, it'll eliminate a lot of changes. Because we could talk about this all day. A husband gets cancer, 6 months later, the wife ends up with some form of cancer. Environmental, what they did in their... So we could eliminate a lot of the future cancers by individual families making changes, dietary, fitness, exercise, lifestyle, lymphatic massage, whatever it is. So why is it taking so long?
Good question. And now we start getting into the deep, dark bowels of medicine. So let's just talk about follow the money trail.
Yeah.
Healthcare, sickness management is what it really is a $4.6 trillion a year medical industrial complex. It is 20% of the gross domestic product. Sickness is big business. Now, there's 1 million medical doctors in America, and they're all bright people, and most of them have good intentions. But think about this. You just spent $500,000 on your undergraduate, your college, and your medical school. Now you spent 4 years in your residency, and they tell you, do this. And if you don't do that, you might lose your license, and you just spent your whole life marching in that direction. Now we add into that, no doctor is allowed to make money off a prescription unless you're an oncologist. So literally, it was written into the law in the 1960s when chemotherapy became common, is that they couldn't get doctors to prescribe it. So they said, how about if you make money off of it? So an oncologist, 2/3 of their income comes from the prescription, literally the kickback from prescribing on chemotherapy. So follow the money trail. And then you have the business of, how are they going to make a living if their whole system is set up in a routine? For instance, I lived in Tulsa for 12 years. I built a home and I built it out of steel frame. Steel makes very good sense because it's got 5 times the wind shear strength. Insects can't penetrate it. You can't burn it. Steel makes very good sense. But all of the tradesmen would show up, the carpenter, the drywaller, the electrician, the plumber, and they're used to working on wood. What am I going to do with this? So there's a system in place, and I somewhat disrupted it. And I noticed the people in your background there. You got Einstein, you got Muhammad Ali, Steve Jobs. They were all brilliant in their field. And you know what else they were? Rule breakers, all of them. And so what we need now is a few rule breakers in the oncology profession, and we're very close to that. But unfortunately, it somehow comes down to oncology is a business, and you've got 10,000 oncologists who, they've got their payments, they've got the kids need braces, and they've got their obligations. And modern medicine can be brutal and not just ostracizing, but imprisoning those who are rebels or anarchists.
I love it. I love it. Keith, you want to jump in? You're about to say something.
Yeah, well, I run into that all the time. So, matter of fact, back in 2000, shortly after 2000, I asked a doctor, I referred a patient back to the doctor to get a vitamin D3 blood test. And the doctor said, "Oh, I've heard of Bishop. He's a witch doctor. No way. I'm not going to do a vitamin D3 blood test." Well, actually, he's now retired. But before he retired, matter of fact, he's actually considered, he was an internist in the Oklahoma City area. And matter of fact, Tulsa is my hometown. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of started following you too, because of your background with American Cancer Treatment Center. So, but he, at the end of his practice, he tested every single patient for the vitamin D3 blood level.
Yeah.
And so
go ahead.
Took time for him to accept that.
Let's just take, if we take the subject of nutrition, so I mentioned 6 vectors. Let's try and give our viewers something to hold on to here. There are 6 main epigenetic vectors that create who you are, your health, longevity, how you feel today, physically, mentally, dentally, etc. Those vectors are attitude, nutrition, toxins, exercise, energy alignment, and the microbiome, the gut. So those 6 vectors. Now let's just take one of those vectors, nutrition. According to the accredited nutrition textbooks, we've got 50 essential nutrients. Those are amino acids, vitamins, minerals, fatty acids. Okay, so 50. Actually, the number should be closer to 100 or 200, but let's stay with their 50. And of those 50, one of them is vitamin D. Let's just talk about that for a second. For centuries, people have known that the sunshine is good for you. Some cultures worship the sun. But we come back to during the Industrial Revolution, what happened was people were working inside and they developed horrific levels of rickets, vitamin D deficiency. The TB, tuberculosis pandemic started when people were told that if you have a tan, that must mean you're a poor worker outside. So people had to be pallid, very, very white, chalk white, which means they got no sunshine or vitamin D. Now let's talk about vitamin D. Actually, it's not even a vitamin. Vitamin means you have to consume this in your diet in order to perform metabolic function. You don't have to eat it in the diet. You make it in your skin. We are photosynthetic creatures. And so and when they came up with the RDAs, the recommended dietary allowances, they said ballpark figure 400 IU per day. And literally that is a speck of dust on your desk. You couldn't even see it. It's so small. It would convert it into micrograms. So 400 was their magic number. Anything more than that, you need a doctor's prescription. And then along comes a researcher at University of Boston, Boston University, who said, wait a minute, when you go out in the sun on a summer's day in a bathing suit, your body makes 10 to 20,000 IU of vitamin D. That's what your body needs. Not 400. That is literally creating rickets. And so what we've had now is people hiding from the sun, put on sunscreen. And we've got pandemic levels of vitamin D deficiency. What does vitamin D do? It regulates 20% of the human genome. So you look at the human genome as this DNA, it's a blueprint on a desk. It's an architect's, here's how we're going to build a new Keith. And from that, the vitamin D regulates 20% of that genome. So if you don't get enough vitamin D, you're going to have depression, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune disease, diabetes, and more. So vitamin D is an incredibly valuable nutrient. And then we have the medical profession making the preposterous statement that nutrition supplements are of no benefit and may be toxic. Well, if you were Robinson Crusoe, and you were on some desert island off the coast of South America. That was a true story, actually. He was shipwrecked, and he lived off of fish and wild goat and root crops and seaweed and sunshine and exercise, and he was incredibly healthy when he was rescued by a ship. They brought him back to England. He told his story. They stole it, basically, and he spent the rest of his short life drinking himself to death, wishing he could get back to his island where he felt better. So, do we need supplements? Not if you're Robinson Crusoe, but we aren't. And so things like vitamin D supplements, absolutely essential. Now we know it can help reverse cancer and autoimmune diseases. So that's just one of the 50 nutrients we could talk about. We could move on to fish oil, EPA, and more. I'll let you take it.
You want to jump
So
in?
that's right. There's so many different things about that. So, I'm a retired pharmacist. I made that shift and I started researching back in the 1990s, doing my family history of cancer. What do I need to do? And then I came across your book, and I've just got to make a shift. But most practitioners have a difficult time with that. And there's going to be a few practitioners that are going to be watching and listening to this. I hope more than a few, but hopefully there's going to be a few. How can we help those practitioners learn and change and into this nutrition aspect and holistic aspect? It's happening. When I first started this back in 2000 in Oklahoma City, there were only 2 other doctors, and they were considered quacks,
Right.
doing, alternative treatment.
Right.
And I was the only other person as a pharmacist. And that was it. Now in Oklahoma City, we probably have actually 30 functional medicine practitioners. So it's definitely changing, but in the oncology area, it's so slow. Is there anything we can do to help that change?
There's a paradigm shift that's going to take place here, Jeff and Keith, and I admire the work that you're doing. You're shining a light in a dark room, and the public needs it. Here is a paradigm shift that I can share with your viewers. There is a difference between surviving and thriving. I'll give you some rough numbers. Out here in California, if you're living on the streets and there's 150,000 street people, the state will support you with food stamps and other things. And let's say that they might give you, maybe 20,000 a year. That's surviving barely. If you make 100,000, you might be able to afford an apartment. So we're going up from that. If you make 500,000, you might be able to buy a home. If you make $1 million, maybe you can buy a home and take a vacation. So there's a difference between surviving and thriving when it comes to money, right? The same thing with nutrient intake. So what we have is 10 milligrams of vitamin C will prevent scurvy. At 60 milligrams, you got the recommended dietary allowance, and you probably won't get scurvy. At 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, you can prevent petechia, which is bruising in senior citizens. At 5,000 milligrams of vitamin C, it becomes a selective anti-neoplastic substance. And now we've got medical doctors who inject 100,000 milligrams or 100 grams of vitamin C into the patient, and it becomes a selective, non-toxic anti-cancer substance. There's a difference between surviving and thriving. Let's take that. You say, well, where's the science behind that? In 1992, so I started with cancer treatment centers in 1989. 1993, I wrote my book, the first version of Beating Cancer with Nutrition. In 1992, I went to a conference hosted by the New York Academy of Sciences, and it was called Beyond Deficiencies. Now, this is a group of academically affiliated MD, PhDs, and they presented evidence for 3 days beyond argument that you need to go beyond deficiencies into optimal doses. And so the title of it was Beyond Deficiencies. For instance, what happens in the human body is you've got this tiered approach. If the body gets, let's move into a different nutrient. Let's talk about vitamin K, vitamin K2. If the body gets 10 micrograms of vitamin K, you won't bleed to death. All right. So it's a clotting mechanism. Good. If you give it 100 micrograms of vitamin K, now it helps to regulate the movement of calcium in and out of the bones. Now, so what we have is arteriosclerosis, is hardening of the arteries. And the doctor will say, stop eating calcium. Doc, I don't eat any calcium. That's because you got a vitamin K and magnesium and D deficiency that's creating that movement of calcium out of the bones and into the soft tissue. Vitamin K is the traffic director. So if you take more vitamin K, now you're not going to get this arteriosclerosis, the calcium depositing in the blood vessel lining. If you take 500 micrograms of vitamin K2, now it becomes a powerful anti-cancer agent that actually works in synergy with chemotherapy. So what I find ironic is that the oncologists have been absolutely hostile when it comes to embracing nutrition, when in fact, nutritionists can make them look better. For instance, radiation therapy can be effective. It can slow down some cancer, it can kill. It's non-selective. It'll kill everything in its pathway. But it's very, the tissue that is anaerobic, meaning it does not have oxygen, is much more resistant to radiation therapy. So good studies have found if you give the patient niacin, vitamin B3, before you give them radiation therapy, then it's much more effective at killing the cancer. So in other words, there's a marriage between these epigenetic nutrition factors with modern oncology. So I'm not against chemo and radiation and surgery. I am against that being the end of the game. That's not going to solve the patient's problem, which is why you have such an incredibly high rate of recurrence of cancer in these patients. The doctor will say, well, we think we got it all. And 2 years later, the patient's back, and now it's more vigorous and aggressive than ever before. That's because you didn't change the underlying cause of the disease. And that's where both of you are making a difference.
I want to jump into something, and you mentioned at the beginning, and it's something where when I dove into my root cause history, I factored in stressful moments in my life. And 2 years prior, everybody knows my story. My father passed away. I was the 42, 43-year-old that talked to my dad 3 times a day. I was very close to my dad. It was a sudden death, unexpected. And for the next 90-something days, I was at the cemetery every day, and it just took a toll on my body. I lost weight. I was stressed. I wasn't eating right. So it was a whole approach to it all. You mentioned attitude and stress. Let's dive into that, guys. I think that is a huge aspect of a lot of people. And you're seeing the cancer rates go up. Is there a correlation with the COVID? And when I mean COVID, I mean people being home, being stressed, being out of a job. And then from there, not eating right, eating fast, not exercising, not moving. So it was a whole correlation of everything that happened over that 2.5, 3-year period. But stress, anxiety, let's dive into that and how that factors into the increase in numbers in cancer going on right now.
Excellent. Let's do that. And COVID, as it's now being unveiled in the autopsy of what went on there, was so unscientific. It was barbaric.
Of course. Yeah.
So if you have risk, and COVID turned out that this was studies from a Dr. John Ioannidis from Stanford, one of the most respected researchers in the world. And he did a study out in that Bay Area, and he said 1 out of 1,000 people dies from COVID. So he found that almost everybody in the Bay Area had it. They had evidence of COVID, but it's a 1 out of 1,000, which is the same as the flu. So if you got a flu epidemic coming through, you don't lock people in their room where they get no exercise, no sunshine. Out here in California, they put people in jail for going surfing. How ridiculous is that? So
we're from Toronto. We're from Toronto, Canada. So we had massive lockdowns here. Massive lockdowns.
Yes, it was unscientific and it was cruel. Yeah. They put my mother, who was 94, in a nursing home, put her in prison for a year. Basically, stay in your room. So let's talk about COVID. Created more problems than it solved. Absolutely beyond argument. All the scientists agree now. So now let's go back to attitude. I could summarize this in one sentence, which is brilliant, from Dr. Deepak Chopra, MD. He's written about 50 books. He says, every cell in your body is eavesdropping on your thoughts.
Wow.
Let me say that again. Every cell in your body is eavesdropping on your thoughts. And you say, well, that's a cute saying. Can you prove it? Absolutely. Candace Pert was a researcher at the National Institutes of Health, and she did work on endorphins. And so endo is inside, orphan is in morphine. Our body makes chemicals in the brain that flow through the body and make us feel good or bad. And so I'm adding another famous name here, Dr. Joe Dispenza. Dr. Joe was in a bike race, and he was hit by a truck and run over by a truck, and he was told he would never walk again, and he used meditation to heal himself in 3 months. So the mind can make us sick, and the mind can make us well. Mind is healer and mind is slayer. Let's talk about what is the science behind that. What we have is these neurochemical peptides. So when we think, we're creating substances that flow through the body, and there are receptors on every cell in the body for those neurochemical peptides that literally open up channels or not. One of the most obvious one is catecholamine or adrenaline, stress hormone. Your car gets stalled on the railroad tracks, and immediately you go into this fight or flight syndrome. I got to get out of here. And so the brain may literally within a half a second, your fingers are flush. Your mouth goes dry. You might empty your bowels and your bladder. Your digestion stops. Your heart rate goes up in a half a second from catecholamine. That's just one example of a chemical from the brain that changes the way your body works. There's about 400 neuropeptides that the brain makes. Now, let's take this even further into anatomy. So you've got your brain, you're thinking, you're stressed, your father died, you were best friends, 3 months, 90 days, you go to the cemetery and you're just reliving the death, the grief. We have two main systems in our nervous system. The sympathetic, which is fight or flight, it says survive the tiger coming after you, and the parasympathetic, which is rest and digest. So they're a balancing act, they're a teeter-totter. And if we have a little bit of stress, but not too much, and we balance it with parasympathetic, we're okay. And our ancestors, thousands of years ago, had to learn to what's going to happen? I see the grass moving over there. Is that a tiger? Is it a snake? And so you go into this stress mode. And 5 minutes later, you find, well, it wasn't. And so I'm okay. Or you outrun the tiger and it's over. 5 minutes of stress, parasympathetic comes back. Now you rest and digest. You're okay. What's happening in modern society for a variety of reasons is we're in stress. The sympathetic nervous system 24/7. We're locked on into the fight or flight, and that will kill you. And you could say, well, how do you prove that? From the brain, we have the vagus nerve. So at the back of the skull, the medulla oblongata, we have the beginning of the vagus nerve. It's the largest nerve in the body. When most people think of a nerve, they think of a cord. And most nerves are like that. The vagus nerve looks more like a fishing net. So it starts at the base of the skull and it goes down throughout all of your internal organs and it wraps around them like a fishing net and it regulates all of your autonomic functions. So from that, if you're in stress, it changes your heart rate. It changes your digestion. It changes your gut, like you, Jeff. And what can happen from the stress, they talk about, I've got this gut instinct. Oh, yeah, you do. We know that the mind, there's a two-way avenue between the mind and the gut. The gut can change the way you think, and your thinking can change the way your digestion works, which is a trigger for colon cancer. So we can prove through anatomy and through biochemistry how the brain affects the way the body works. And the first thing every cancer patient should do is stop and think about what happened to me 1 to 2 years prior to the onset of the cancer. Let me give you a couple of examples. Patient that we worked with at the hospital, a gentleman in his 40s with laryngeal cancer, cancer of the larynx, the voice box, rare. His doctor back home had done a laryngectomy, carved out the larynx, and it still was spreading. He had metastatic disease, came to us. He got with our program, which was psychoneuroimmunology, nutrition. We had the oncologist, of course, all of the medical stuff. Detoxification. We had a diet there. And I asked him, what happened to you 1 to 2 years prior to the onset of your cancer? He said, my wife left me. And he said, I thought it was a good marriage. And the night she left, she said, there's nothing you can say that will make me stay. And he got cancer of the say box. Interesting. We move on. I could give you all sorts of stories about patients where the cancer was emblematic of the psychospiritual insult that went on in the body. And I believe, as a nutritionist with 47 years experience, that most diseases begin in the spirit and the mind and then ripple down into the body. Granted, there are people who have frank clinical deficiencies of a nutrient, and that started the problem, yes. But in many cases, we have to first look at the psychospiritual aspect of the disease. Joe Dispenza, I mentioned, he wanders the world now giving these lectures, and he's got over 10,000 cases of spontaneous remission of serious illnesses by using the power of the mind. So right now, we feel like we're victims. The mind is a wonderful servant. It's an awful master. And so right now, if you let the mind become the master, and so every morning I start off with meditation. I'm a nutritionist and I eat a good diet and I take supplements and I exercise. I swim, I walk, I do ballroom dancing, I do almost everything right. However, I start every day with meditation.
I love that. You want to jump in there, Keith?
That's wonderful information, and that's an area where I'm not very well, trained at, and so how does a person get some help to deal with the emotional, spiritual type thing? So what's the best thing to do for just the average person?
Good point. First of all, don't be alone. I have found that cancer patients who have a co-patient, meaning a helper, always do better. Mother, father, brother, sister, priest, rabbi, somebody. You need a helper. Don't try to do this alone. The second thing is start thinking of a sense of empowerment. You're not a victim.
Yeah.
You didn't cause this on purpose. A sense of empowerment. And so what the mind, the spirit, the meditation, the psychospiritual, the whole thing, what it does is it talks about empowerment. That if you go back actually meditation is about 5,000 years old. We can go back to Buddha, Jesus, we can go back to Paramahansa Yogananda. You take any spiritual leader in any group, and they all did meditation and breathing. And that was the beginning of harnessing the power of the mind. So I was raised Catholic. My mother was a devout Catholic, and I'm still a feral Christian. And I think of we're connected to God. And that there's this soul spirit around us, this aura that we cannot deny. And when you feel a connection to the universe, you feel empowered. So I'm hoping that this whole interview is about empowerment. That's my message for 47 years is, how can I show you that you can take charge of your life, make it a masterpiece? And that is those 6 vectors. And so when people realize you're not a victim, you're the master of this. You're the architect. You're writing the play. Get in charge. Work with your doctor. Find a co-patient. But here's another beautiful soundbite from Joe Dispenza. We are all given opportunities that are brilliantly disguised as impossible situations.
Yeah.
Let me say that again. We are all given opportunities that are brilliantly disguised as impossible situations, from Joe Dispenza's viewpoint. And then I'll come back to you, Jeff. Joe, run over by a truck, broken back. You're going to be in a wheelchair the rest of your life. He had some experience in hypnotherapy and prayer, and he used that combination to heal himself in 3 months. Now he wanders the world and teaches it to others. Opportunity that was an impossible situation. You, Jeff, colon cancer, your father died. Horrible thing. He was your best friend. Colon cancer. How bad can it get? You turned that as an opportunity. It's an impossible situation that you turned into an opportunity. And I have found many cancer patients get up on a lectern, a podium, and they'll say, cancer is the best thing that ever happened to me. And when you get up off the floor, what they're telling you is, it changed my life and everybody around me. And you start realizing this body, this vehicle, this temple of the Holy Spirit is an amazing organism, and we don't respect it. You talked about the increase in all these diseases, and that's true. Stress plays a role. Seed oils, They're dumping corn oil, soy, safflower seed oils into us in an alarming rate that's causing inflammatory diseases. We have mineral deficiencies. I was born on a farm in Illinois. If you take a harvest every year and you never add, here's some math. There's 118 elements on the periodic table. 118. Anyone with chemistry looks at that. Of those, 95 of them are in the ocean. Of those, 65 of them are in the human body. Of those, they claim 15 are essential. I think it's more like 50, but whatever. Let's say 15 in the textbooks. Of those, they only add 3 of them to the soil. NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So every year we harvest food and we don't add back trace minerals, every year the soil becomes more impoverished. I think America and the Western society is not unlike Rome, in which the soil becomes impoverished, the food is deficient, and you're not getting chromium, selenium, magnesium, vanadium, calcium, all of those. We are deficient in many minerals because we're not nourishing the soil properly. So all of this says that we're doing a lot of things wrong, and that's leading to this cancer epidemic. In the year 1900, it was 2% of people would develop cancer. Now it's 42% of Americans living today will develop cancer in their lifetime, and 25% will die from it. And it's unnecessary. We have an understanding. I mean, I organized 3 international symposia in 1994, 97, and 98 in Tulsa, in San Diego, and in Tampa. 3 international. These were CME Category 1 conferences. We brought in 40 speakers, MD, PhDs. We brought in 400 to 500 people in the audience. Most of them were academicians. And we taught them, and it was basically saying, we understand the biochemistry of cancer, and much of it is nutritionally related. And a patient who is not getting an aggressive, comprehensive cancer treatment program, which includes nutrition, that's malpractice.
Yeah. I want to jump into one thing you said there. Let me jump in quickly. And I think it's so important that you mentioned something, Doc, is victim. A lot of people, when I was diagnosed, I gave myself a 24-hour window to feel sorry for myself. And after 24 hours, I'm like, F this, let's focus. I got 2 children at home. I got a beautiful family. I have a reason to be here. Let's get on this. Good. I think our issue with most individuals, and I think it's so important for everybody that listens to this podcast, is you cannot be a victim, because the minute you become a victim, everything surrounds it. And I think one of the biggest issues is when you're looking at something like social media right now, is people are rewarded for being a victim. They're not rewarded for being the hero. So when you're a victim, you get all these likes, all these. So I think that has a huge play in it. So I want everybody to listen to what you said is you cannot be the victim. The minute you become the victim, you've lost the battle right there.
Let's talk about that. Very good point, Jeff. In the 60s, I remember there was a TV show on called Queen for a Day. And basically, it was a piss and moaning, who's got the worst story to tell? We'll give you a refrigerator. So they would bring these women up, and they would all, my kid died, my dog died, and my house burned down, and all right, next. And they come up with this pissing and moaning story. And the person who had the most grievous, horrific life got a refrigerator or something like that. And so we started applauding wretched lifestyles instead of thinking, how can we, and I'm not denying that. I've had my own problems, and I'm not denying other people's problems. And I go along with a famous philosophy is our purpose in life is to help others. And if you can't help them, don't hurt them. That's very basic. But back to the victim thing. Somehow we took guilt and suffering as a way of life.
Yeah.
That's not good. Jesus said, I have come to bring you life abundantly. It is the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. These works you can do and more. None of that talks about pissing and moaning to me. It says that we are empowered. These works you can do and more. We're supposed to be strong, powerful individuals who recognize our divine potential. In the beginning, God created man in his own image and likeness. We are co-creators. So when people take away that victim, guilt, suffering stuff and say, I'm a co-creator, I'm going to take charge here. And with the universe's help, I'm going to change my life and the people around me. And that's where I talked about Renaissance. Earlier in our discussion, I said, I believe we're on the cusp of Renaissance. There is a saying from, I'll forget the name. He said, all truth passes through 3 phases. First, it's rejected. Second, it's violently opposed. And third, it's accepted as self-evident.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at with cancer treatment, right? So in the 60s and 70s, anybody who talked about nutrition and cancer was a quack. It was rejected. And then in the 90s, they put some of them in jail, violently opposed. And now we're on the verge of saying it's obvious. Of course, everyone does this. It's kind of like what happened with Ignaz Semmelweis. He said, wash your hands before you go into surgery. Now, of course, it's obvious. Everyone should do that. And we're on the verge of that with cancer, that it is a metabolic disease. It's not an isolated lump or a bump. It is a spiritual disease. It's a nutritional disease. It's a disease of toxins. Let me stop there for a second. We dump 3 billion pounds of pesticides on our food crops every year. Fungicides, herbicides. There was a study done by the Environmental Working Group where they took 15 placentals. So woman gives birth. They took the blood from the placenta. This is not abortion, anything. They're just taking the medical refuse, and they tested it for 287 chemicals, all of them toxins. And they found these newborn infants were positive for 270 of these chemicals that were carcinogenic, including flame retardants. Now, how do you get flame retardants into the body of a brand? So we're literally being steeped in toxins. That's part of the cancer epidemic. We need to clean up our act. Exercise. If you want just one takeaway from this whole conference, this discussion, 30 minutes of exercise a day cuts your risk for cancer in half. If you do nothing else, just 30 minutes of exercise, and I can explain the physiology. It is a detoxifier. It helps to regulate stress. It helps with bowel movements. Exercise is an amazing medicine. And 2/3 of Americans, 67%, are overweight, and 2/3 of Americans get no exercise. Now, let me stop there, if I may. There was a study done in the 1950s by a professor at Stanford, and it was sort of a banal, routine, unexciting study where he took in 500 preschoolers. This was in the Bay Area, San Francisco. Takes in 4-year-olds, brings them into a room. I'll give you a marshmallow right now, or if you wait 15 minutes, I'll give you 2 marshmallows. And so 2/3 of the kids wanted the immediate marshmallow. They were called grabbers. 1/3 of the kids would say, I'll wait 15 minutes, and they got 2 marshmallows. 17 years later, the professor's daughter was in that experiment, and she said, Dad, the grabbers are not doing too well in life, and the waiters are doing better. So he went back and reviewed the data and then wrote a book called The Marshmallow Study, and it's brilliant. What you have is delayed versus immediate gratification. Now, here's a trigger. If I could share with your viewers one take-home lesson. Delayed gratification means right now I'm going to go for a walk. It might feel better if I had a bag of potato chips and watched a movie. That's immediate gratification, but it's not going to do you any good. So delayed gratification says you're going to take care of your body and you will feel better later. So his study and his book clearly proved 2/3 of Americans are overweight. 2/3 of Americans are in debt. 2/3 of Americans are on medication. Need I say more? Delayed gratification versus immediate gratification. If you start thinking about, I'm going to take care of myself right now. Maybe it'd be better to have a 6-pack of beer and a donut and watch a game. But maybe if you had some fish and broccoli and took a walk, and then tomorrow and the next month, you're going to feel better. So delayed gratification is something we need to be training our young people in.
Definitely. There's Dr. Quillin, you have so many great, ideas and your vectors, and we just barely scratched the surface. So I have a feeling we're going to have you again.
I was about to say this is going to be a regular post. Hopefully, we can get you on. I was going to bring that. I want to dive into one last thing you said at the beginning, because I do have an appointment coming up, and we have to have you back. And To be honest, the way we're talking right now, we probably could go on for 4 or 5 hours with no issues here because you have your knowledge base is just. I'm sitting here. I've probably written I don't know how many notes. I'm just writing notes of stuff you're saying right now, which is awesome.
Good.
You said at the beginning, non-toxic hope, and I love that saying. Let's talk about the meaning of that.
So too often, cancer patients, your oncologist who said there's no science behind that nutrition. Let's talk about science. The new soundbite is evidence-based, okay? Let's look at the evidence for chemotherapy. There are at least 5 different studies, including meta-analysis. So they'll take a bunch of studies and call this a meta-analysis, proving that chemotherapy is effective in about 3% of all advanced epithelial cancers. 3%. So what do you have to go through to be one of those 3%? Prayer gets 10%. And so that's the toxic approach. Chemo, radiation, and surgery are the toxic approaches to cancer. And I'm not against any of them if they're appropriate. Lance Armstrong, the multiple winner of the Tour de France, who then was defrocked because he cheated. But anyway, he was a good athlete at the very least, and he had testicular cancer.
Yes, they all cheated.
Yeah, probably. But Lance Armstrong had testicular cancer from sitting on a hard bicycle, which caused inflammation of the testicles.
Yeah.
And so then he has surgery and chemo, and he's cured, and he's still alive. Wonderful. Chemo worked for him, and it works for some childhood leukemias. But in the vast majority of cases that it's used, it's hopeless. And we know that. So chemo, it can be useful, especially in smaller doses. Radiation can be helpful. Surgery can be helpful. But what I talk about is non-toxic hope. That if you find the right doctor, one of your viewers out there has been diagnosed with cancer. All right. I said, first of all, find a co-patient, somebody who you can trust, who's going to help you. Second of all, take action and have a sense of optimism. This can and will work out well. You have to have hope and optimism, and then start researching it. And Jeff, you jumped into, you had your list of lifestyle vectors that may have been negative, that may have led to your cancer. Good. Let's start getting educated. In my books, Beating Cancer with Nutrition and 12 Keys to a Healthier Cancer Patient, I mention all of these vectors. And one of them, I've got 21 Days to a Healthier Cancer Patient. So hope, optimism, education. Now you're going to say, well, what is the best course for me? Now, the doctor who lives down the street, who's going to refer you to his friend he plays golf with, may not be the best course for you. You need to do some research on this. And there are, whatever cancer you have, if you have a pulse, you have hope. And so I encourage the viewers to put together a package, find a doctor who will work with you. I can tell you endless stories about doctors who were really, really stubborn and disillusioned on the whole subject. I flew out from Tulsa to California to be with a family member who had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, bone cancer. And I showed his oncologist. Here's me. I've got a textbook, Adjuvant Nutrition in Cancer Treatment, organized 3 international conferences. I'm vice president of nutrition at Cancer Treatment Centers. I've got a PhD RD CNS. Here's my books. Here's some studies, the original articles. He said, go away. And he told the patient, if you do any of this, I won't treat you. And the patient died 18 months later with his wife pregnant with twins. My point is, if your oncologist won't work with you, find one who will.
Yeah. And don't be scared to ask the questions. Don't be scared to get as much information. Don't be scared to get other opinions as well. I have an individual, I get on a regular basis, 2-3 people a week seem to be reaching out to me, just asking questions, and I'll source them and pass them to the right, tell them my story, what I'm doing, or also pass them to the right individuals like yourselves. And one of them, he just reached out to me, about 3 weeks ago, and we started talking, lives locally, my age, 2 kids, same thing, I had rectum cancer, but he had colon cancer, same thing, colorectal cancer. And his oncologist, quote unquote, fired him, like got rid of him because he refused to do chemo.
Right.
And she said she would not, she was a female physician, and she refused. Once he refused to do the chemo, she says, I cannot work with you if you are not going to follow my procedures. And so he had to actually have his original surgeon to be his quote unquote oncologist unwillingly for the next 6-7 months till he found another oncologist because she refused. When you hear that, it's just like, are you kidding me? But that's happening on a regular basis.
There is an extraordinary amount of pressure put on physicians, and I respect them. They're very bright. Most of them mean well, but all of them are in a system, and they want to make their $500,000, $1 million a year, and they're not going to do anything that jeopardizes that.
Yeah.
And as I said, oncologists make their money basically by selling chemotherapy, and if you won't take it, they don't need your business. They fire you. So I'm telling our viewers right now, there is hope. I see a renaissance in healthcare in this country. I think RFK can make a difference. I think we're starting to move in the right direction. Basically, what he found is the 17 members who were on the vaccine advisory committee were all taking money from the vaccine industry. Now, think about that. Does that make any sense? They talk about vested conflict of interest. So I see us moving in the right direction, and it's going to be a grassroots movement. It's going to start with you, Jeff, and Keith getting out to 100,000 people who then tell their friends, who then tell their friends, and then the doctor who says, if you won't take my chemotherapy, then I won't treat you. Good. Then I'll go to the doctor who will work with me, and you can starve to death.
Yeah.
And then that oncologist will change their ways.
Yeah, it's a domino effect, right? One little domino at a time, 100%. Yeah.
Mhm.
Do you want to ask any last questions, Keith, before we wrap this up?
I do, but we're running out of time.
No, ask away. I got a couple more minutes.
So do you? Okay. Yeah. So what do you think about, there's a big movement for fasting, intermittent fasting and keto diet. So what do you think about those?
Very useful. Yeah, think about it. Up until the Industrial Revolution, our ancestors did not eat 3 meals a day.
Yeah.
They basically would eat something when they could find it. The means of preserving foods was, in general, dried food until we finally came up with canned food, and that was only in the last couple centuries. But dried food, rice and beans, and dry your meat. And on the ships, they would have dried meat and dried bread, but they didn't eat 3 meals a day. So intermittent fasting has demonstrated to be very useful. What I suggest for my patients is have a 6-hour window when you eat and an 18-hour window when you don't eat, or something like that. So for instance, you get up at 8 o'clock, you need some breakfast, have some. 6 hours later, it's going to be 2 p.m., you have another meal. And then from 2 p.m. until 8 a.m., you're not eating anything. It's nothing but fluid. You can have tea, coffee, water, but no food. And what you're doing in that, there's a biochemical mechanism in the human body called autophagy, and it's brilliant. So think about our ancestors. They're 2 days without food, and what nature says is you better get smart and fast and young, or you're going to die. And so autophagy, auto means cell, phagy is to eat. So what nature does is it starts eating these marginal cells and starts recreating you into a newer, more faster, smarter person who can go out and find something and eat it. So intermittent fasting is extremely valuable. Back to the business of cancer is a sugar feeder. It's an obligate glucose metabolizer. And we know that Americans have a serious problem with diabetes, with obesity, with insulin resistance, and all of that plays a role in cancer. If you chronically elevated blood glucose levels, you're at greater risk for cancer. You can lower those blood glucose levels by eating a low glycemic diet, meaning no processed foods, and also by intermittent fasting and exercise. And let me give you, we only have a few minutes left here. Let me give our viewers something you can do. There's 100 different schools of thought on nutrition. There's paleo, keto, there's the Mediterranean diet, there's raw, there's vegan. I could go on. There's 100 different schools of thought. I have my own, but I'm going to give you something that all nutritionists agree on, all of them. Number one, there's an aisle in your grocery store called refined breakfast cereals. Stay away from it.
Yeah.
There's another aisle in your grocery store called chips. Stay away from it. There's another aisle in your grocery store called soda pop, high sugar drinks. Stay away from it. And the last aisle we're talking about is pastries, the Twinkies, the donuts, all of that stuff. If you just stay away from those 4 aisles, you've already made a quantum improvement in your diet, no matter what other philosophies you follow. Those 4 aisles are killing Americans.
Yeah. This has been...
yes, that's true. This has been great.
I mean, we could talk about that. I mean, that's another... God, there's so much we could talk about today. I mean, if you go to grocery stores, we always hear that walk around the outside aisle. That's where all the healthy stuff is, right? But this has been absolutely incredible. I know you're a busy gentleman, but we do need to have you back, and maybe on a regular basis, because we do have the audience, and I think your knowledge is like, I'm sitting here and I'm just like, I wrote 3 pages of notes, and that's just stuff for myself. So I just love it. And I love little quotes or saying stuff like that. So this has been absolutely a pleasure and an honor to meet you. And I knew about you. I didn't know what I needed to know about you. And today it was just a glimpse of just your knowledge, your understanding. I love how you're constantly just referring to quotes from other individuals, and just like I'm in my head, I'm like, how do you keep this all in your damn head? It's incredible. All these quotes, all these things are just on the ball. So amazing. I truly appreciate this today.
Well, it's been a pleasure and honor. Thank you for sharing your viewers. And I think we all can think of, who am I to make a difference?
Yeah.
Who are you to make a difference? What if Mother Teresa said that? What if Mahatma Gandhi said that? What if Martin Luther King said that? You can make a difference, and you guys are making a difference. And the viewers out there, you could be healed. You could become an emissary, a missionary, and your zeal is to respect this temple of the Holy Spirit and take care of yourself and spread that to the rest of the world. We all would be happier and healthier if we were taking personal empowerment. This is all about non-toxic hope and empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, buddy.
My pleasure.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
I look forward to our next visit.
Thank you, buddy. Have a good day, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.